I'm here with Elliot Morris from Strength in Numbers. Strength in Numbers is a data-driven organization that provides analytics to help explain the current state of American democracy. And Strength in Numbers works with Verasight to collect polling data on a monthly basis. Elliot just ran the April poll and has some really interesting findings to share. So with that, welcome, Elliot. Would love for you to talk about why this monthly poll matters and maybe outline some of the really interesting top line findings you have for April.
Oh, great. Well, I'm happy to be here and talk through it. I guess I'll just say, in terms of why this work matters to me, why I think it's important. I used to work at several large media outlets, both original broadcast news behemoths and increasingly online newspaper magazines. And we always covered polling, but it was very distanced, in my opinion. There was a lot of responding to whatever the national debates were at the moment. Let's find some data so we can write a headline that gets clicks or gets people to watch our segment on whatever morning show we're doing. And that's fine, but it felt distant. I have a political science and a polling background. I wrote a book about why polling is important to democracy, and I wanted to do survey work that was closer to people, closer to subscribers for the newsletter, and tapped into what they were saying was important to them, not just what was important to the national conversation or might get clicks and headlines. So I'm happy to be a customer of Verasight. You can clip that. And we do this monthly survey so that we can do survey work that's really close to the American people. In our April survey, I mean, one of the things that anyone who does surveys in American politics right now will know is that things don't really change a whole lot poll to poll at the monthly level. People are pretty stable in their beliefs. So if you are a reader of Strength in Numbers or a reader of surveys in general, this stuff will sound familiar to you. It's a midterm election year here in America, and we have the out party leading on the generic ballot question. That's the question that asks who you will vote for in the House of Representatives in your district. Democrats, the out party, are leading on that question by 7 points in our survey. That's the same exact number that we had last time, or within the margin of error of what we had last time. We also ask Americans to tell us how they feel things are going in America today. They can tell us things are going well, things could be going better, or things are going poorly and major changes are needed. Okay, in our last survey in March, 52% of people said major changes are needed. In this survey, 55% of people say major disruptive changes are needed to America, to the country. And that may be no surprise to anyone paying attention to the news, where you'll see headlines about prices increasing, foreign wars, dysfunction in Congress, et cetera. There's not a whole lot of good news out there for people these days. On prices, we've also found the war in Iran is taking its toll on the president. So we have around the same number of people saying that prices are important to them. 32 or 33% of the public says prices are their number one issue. And in last month's survey, when we asked people how they felt the president of the United States was handling prices, Donald Trump got 28% of people saying they disapproved of how he was handling prices. This month, that number is 26. But there's been some significant movement on the other side of the question, people saying they're unhappy. So 67% of people in our previous survey said they were unhappy with how President Trump was handling prices. And now that number is 72. So, okay, do some math real quick in our heads. Last time, in our previous survey, Trump was 39 points underwater on prices. This month, after an explosion in the price of gasoline, Trump's at minus 46. That is his worst rating ever. And I think those are our key top lines so far.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Elliot. Seems like, given the first thing you mentioned about how on a month over month basis, you typically wouldn't see, huge swings in the population sentiment about a given topic. It seems like nonetheless, some of those changes in people's view on how President Trump is doing on prices are pretty significant, given the context that it's just a 1 month change from a similar population.
Yeah, every month your opinion about Donald Trump overall might not change, but if there's been a news event that is really significant, then we do find movement around those. And I've been polling on Donald Trump for 10 years now, and when he does something like a war, or when there's a big change in the inflation statistics from the government, people do tend to react to that type of stuff if you ask about it in particular.
Mm.
Otherwise, public opinion in America is typically like a pretty slow. I mean, it'd be a really boring roller coaster. It's typically more of a more of a drive through the hill country.
I guess the news often tries to make it feel like a really extreme roller coaster on a day-to-day
Right.
basis, but really how people feel when you really like ask people how they really feel, it's more like a gradual change. So one of the things that you mentioned off the top was how the out party is polling favorably. Could you talk a little bit more about what your April data says about the 2026 midterm outlook?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the top line here is Democrats are ahead on their House generic ballot vote by 7 percentage points. That's among registered voters, people who are likely to vote in the next election. And the key drivers of support for them, well, the key drivers of defection from the president are prices overall, and that's a pretty hard thing to overcome when you are the president. Apart from that, Americans in general are very unhappy with how Donald Trump has handled healthcare.
Mm.
You might remember last year the Republican Party passed a bill that strips away lots of funding for Medicaid expansion in the states and has led to healthcare costs increasing. So it's another cost issue in some ways,
Mm.
but it's a particular manifestation of that. Um, People are upset about Trump's deportation program, where he's underwater on that question as well. And of course, trade and foreign relations, he's also underwater on. It's actually hard to find something that the public agrees with the president on. It's somewhat self-explanatory. If you're losing in the election, then people aren't going to be super happy with pretty much anything you're doing. The only positive rating for the president in our poll is on border security, where Trump has a slight 2-point edge. Um, People also say that prices are really important to them. So it's not just that they disagree with the president, it's that they disagree with him on something that matters to them.
Mm.
When we ask Americans to pick 3 issues that matter to them most, 56% of the public chooses prices as one of their 3 issues. And the next 2 issues are jobs and healthcare, as I mentioned. So those are going to be pretty hard issues for the Republican Party to overcome for the election unless they can get inflation down and maybe get the president to stop talking about tariffs, but perhaps that's the bigger driver of inflation over the last year.
Got it. So with 56% of respondents listing prices as their top issue, is that must be then by far kind of the highest ranked issue in terms of importance?
Well, everyone can pick 3, so the numbers here actually add up to 300 instead of 100. I know it's a little bit confusing, but it is the most common. It is the most commonly picked answer. 56%, 40% say jobs, and 34% of people said healthcare.
Okay, got it, got it. You had mentioned that the war in Iran is something that's connected to prices, inflation, how people feel about that. Could you talk a little bit more about what the April data says about the ceasefire and the war in Iran?
Yeah. uh, for some context, we did this survey. I think we went into the field the day after the ceasefire, or maybe the day that the ceasefire was announced. A ceasefire that doesn't look to have stuck or might not stick. Um, so we were able to ask people how they felt about the ceasefire, if they've heard about it, and if they thought the U.S. going to war in Iran was worth the cost at all. On that latter question, 16% of people said that the war with Iran was definitely worth the cost, whereas 51% of Americans said it was definitely not worth the cost. And that level of dissatisfaction is also present in the other questions people have been asking about the war in Iran, such as, do you approve of how the president is handling the war in Iran? Most polls show there's somewhere between a 20 and 30 point gap on that question as well. We also asked Americans if they thought that they understood the reason the U.S. went to war in Iran. Donald Trump had a press conference about a month into the war to explain, which it's some evidence in itself that this wasn't very well explained to the American public, and that is represented in our survey as well. So only 28% of the public says that they understand why the U.S. went to Iran in the first place. So those 2 numbers combined, people saying they don't think it was worth the cost and they don't understand it, that's a pretty sticky situation for the government to be in. Finally, we did ask whether or not America achieved its goals with the ceasefire. So 16% of the public says the U.S. achieved its goal and the ceasefire is right. We did what we needed to do. Let's get out. whereas 48% of people support the ceasefire, but they support it because they say the U.S. should never have gone to war in the first place. So there is support for the ceasefire the administration has announced, but we should not necessarily interpret that as support for the president or the war in general.
Got it. And with all the challenges that you've outlined that the Trump administration is facing in terms of public opinion, I know you also included some questions about sentiment and opinion around impeachment. So could you talk a little bit about what you asked there and what you found?
Yeah, this was really surprising. This was perhaps our most surprising result. So without leading anyone in any different direction, we just asked straight up, would you support or oppose the U.S. House of Representatives voting to impeach President Trump? That's all the question wording said. We didn't say, he's done this or that in Iran or this on prices. It's just a straight up impeachment ask. The result of this question was much more negative than I expected. So 55% of Americans in total say they would support the U.S. House of Representatives voting to impeach President Trump. That's 45% of people say they strongly support, and 10% would somewhat support that. Whereas 37% say they would oppose an effort to impeach Trump in the House of Representatives, with 7% feeling that somewhat and 30% feeling it strongly. We like to call this an intensity gap, this difference between the people picking this very strong answer on one side or the other side. And in this case, that's a 15-point intensity gap. The interpretation of that is it would be a lot easier to rally some level of support for the impeachment than it would to rally some level of public opposition to it, all things being equal, which of course, they never are.
Right. And with your, long experience in polling, is this a surprising result just in general? Do you feel like there's typically this level of intensity or support for voting to impeach the president at this stage in a given administration?
I don't have anything on intensity, but I can answer about support for you. So for some comparative context, I just pulled up a Monmouth University poll from January 2021, right after the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. After that, 56% of Americans said they would approve of impeaching Trump, and 42% said they would disapprove of that. Now, slightly different question wording, slightly different poll mode, but my interpretation would be that public support for impeaching the president is about what it was after January 6th, which itself was a pretty high level of support for, what is a pretty drastic action historically.
Fascinating. All right. With all of this current sentiment and with the out party currently being favored, would love to dive a little bit more into the Democratic Party itself. I know you asked a couple of interesting questions about how voters feel about the Democratic Party, whether that would affect their decision to vote Democratic or not. Would love for you to unpack that, as well as maybe some of the early interesting results you have around potential candidates for the Democratic presidential ballot.
So over the last year, there's been a lot of polling showing the Democratic Party at a pretty big favorability disadvantage. So if you ask Americans how you view the Democratic Party, typically more Americans would say they disapprove of the Democratic Party than said they disapproved of the Republican Party on net. We found last year that this was because there were a lot of Democrats, people who would vote for the Democratic Party, presumably, who were saying they were unhappy with the party. We no longer find this in our data. So in our April survey, the Democratic Party has a net favorability rating of -3. So 3 percentage points more of Americans say they view the party negatively than positively, whereas the Republican Party's net approval rating on this is -16. So we are, I think, now in territory where the Democratic Party is doing better on these favorability metrics than people would assume based on those 2025, 2024 numbers. Regardless, we asked people to tell us whether or not they were going to vote for the Democratic Party because they like what the Democratic Party is doing, or whether they're holding their nose and voting for them even though they don't like what they're doing, or whether or not they're going to vote for the Republican Party. So our question wording, which I haven't seen asked elsewhere, was verbatim, thinking about the Democratic Party ahead of the 2026 election, which of the following best describes your view? And 29% of Americans said that they were going to support the Democratic Party and that they would vote for them. So that they like what the Democratic Party is doing and they'll vote for them happily. 18% of people said they are unhappy with the Democrats, but will probably still vote for them anyway. So that's your reluctant Democratic bloc. 10% of Americans said that they were unhappy with the Democrats, so they will vote for the Republicans. And 24% of people said they were going to vote for the Republican Party anyway. My inference would be they were never going to feel positively about the Democratic Party. These people were given a sort of escape hatch from the question, so they didn't have to issue their opinion about the Democrats. So if you add these up, there is a slight advantage for the Democratic Party, but we do find that there's a large block of voters who are unhappy with them. It's just that previously that unhappy block was saying they didn't like the Democratic Party, they view it negatively, and over the past couple of months, they've started to come back around to the Democrats' corner.
Got it. I think you also dug a little bit deeper into potential candidates, name recognition, kind of some of the early, shapings of the Democratic presidential ticket in the next presidential election. Could you talk a little bit about what you asked about there and what you found?
Well, I know it always feels like the 2028 election is right around the corner, and a lot of names from the 2028 election will come up here. But what we asked was for respondents to tell us a politician who shared their values. And they had an open-ended response to that question. They could name anyone that they wanted. And the reason we asked this was because based on this understanding that people don't like the Democratic Party or that they are viewed negatively, which again, no longer true relative to the Republican Party. It is still true in absolute terms. We wanted to know whether or not there was a figure out there that people would prefer to have. If the Democratic Party sort of shaped its image around one of these figures, would that be a more favorable rating for the party? So some names stand out. Among Democrats, the most common answer, if you ask people to tell you if there's a politician who has their values, again, open-ended, the most common answer is Bernie Sanders at 16%. After him is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, at 14%, and Zoran Mamdani, the Democratic mayor of New York City, at 10%. Barack Obama also comes up, one of the most popular figures in American politics, if not the most popular figure, according to my previous Strength in Numbers Verasight polling. He comes up at 7%. He's tied with Pete Buttigieg. And then right after that is, somewhat interestingly, the presumed 2028 frontrunner, Gavin Newsom, at just 6% of Democrats naming him when they were prompted, again, open-ended, to think of someone who shares their values. They might vote for him anyway, even though they think he doesn't share his values, right? So that's not a statement on who's going to win the Republican Party or the Democratic Party nomination in 2028 per se.
Fascinating. I had kind of framed the question as like early candidates for the Democratic ticket, but really you didn't prompt that at all. It was just tell me a politician who shares values with you, which would be an interesting data point in that context. Got it.
And people are probably picking the politician that comes to the front of their mind, that's been in the national conversation and that sort of thing. But nevertheless, if you are one of the people on this list, then you are in a better spot than the people who were not named at all.
Yeah, it suggests
it's early, so
it suggests name recognition and some kind of favorability at the same time.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for taking some time to talk with me about some of your April poll results, Elliot. Really interesting stuff. I'm curious if there's anything, across all the results that you would suggest as a next step that we as citizens or journalists or political groups should consider taking action on based on the results of your April poll.
Well, the thing that I really like about our collaboration is that we're able to get more information about what people are actually thinking and caring about. And the way that works is that subscribers to the Strength in Numbers newsletter, right, we're a digital publication, can suggest questions. And I think that is particularly very powerful for news operations out there, letting their subscribers or viewers or what have you suggest questions that they actually care about. Because the only reason that we do polling anyway is to talk to the people. And if we are only asking them what is important for elite discourse or internal party debates or to get clicks, then we're not using this tool to the best of its ability. So I would say do more collaborative polling with the American people.
Amazing. Well, that's obviously a big part of what we're about at Verasight. So we'll take that to heart. Thanks for joining us, Elliot.
Okay, thanks, Tyler.